Brenda Andrew, the only woman on Oklahoma's death row, denied in federal appeals court Tuesday, the 10th Circuit upholding her 2004 first-degree murder sentencing. The former Sunday school teacher was convicted of killing her estranged husband.
A quiet life turned upside down. Brenda Andrew, once a devoted mother and wife, is now the only woman on death row in Oklahoma. Accused of orchestrating her husband's murder for money, her case has captivated the world. But is she truly guilty, or has the system failed her? It was a quiet night, or at least it seemed to be. The kind of night where the world is asleep and nothing feels out of place. But in one suburban home in Oklahoma, a tragedy was unfolding. Rob Andrew, a husband and father, was murdered in cold blood, his life stolen from him in his own garage. And there, left to bleed in the darkness, was Brenda Andrew, a woman who claimed she was the victim. But was she? Was the story of two masked intruders who had come to kill just that, a story? Or was there something darker, something far more calculated, lurking behind the bloodshed? Hey there, I'm glad you're here. In today's case, we're diving into the story of Brenda Andrew, the only woman currently on death row in Oklahoma. Accused of murdering her husband to cash in on a life insurance policy, her case has captivated and confused so many. But what if the truth isn't what we've been told? Stick with us as we unravel this shocking case. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, let's get into it. In the early 1990s, Brenda Andrew's life seemed like the epitome of suburban bliss. She was a devoted wife, a loving mother of 2 children, and a well-respected member of her community in Enid, Oklahoma. Married to Rob Andrew since 1984, their life together appeared to be the picture of success. Rob worked as an advertising executive, providing for his family, while Brenda was deeply involved in their church and community, serving as a Sunday school teacher. But beneath the surface, their seemingly perfect life began to unravel. Over time, tensions started to rise between Brenda and Rob. Though outwardly they maintained their roles as a typical family, their marriage was quietly becoming strained. The emotional connection that once held them together began to fade, and what was once a partnership based on love and mutual respect was now laced with growing dissatisfaction. Rob, described by those close to him as emotionally invested in the marriage, found himself struggling as Brenda became increasingly distant. Though Rob continued to be a loving husband, Brenda's feelings began to change, and their relationship grew more distant with each passing year. This slow but steady deterioration set the stage for the tragedy that would soon follow. Despite their growing emotional gap, the couple maintained the illusion of normalcy for their 2 children, as well as for the friends and neighbors who knew them. Outwardly, they were a picture-perfect family, but inside their home, things were falling apart. The cracks in their marriage, though invisible to outsiders, were starting to show, and no one could have predicted how things would come to a head just a few years later. It was a quiet November evening in Oklahoma City, a night like many others had been for the Andrew household. Inside the 2-story home lived Rob and Brenda Andrew, along with their 2 children. But as the clock ticked toward darkness, fate had already begun to unravel its thread. Shortly after 7 p.m., a pair of shotgun blasts shattered the calm. In the garage of their house, Rob Andrew was struck twice and collapsed. His wife, Brenda Andrew, was also hit, sustaining a wound to her left arm. Their children, by some mercy, escaped harm. First responders found a chaotic scene. Rob lay motionless. Brenda, bleeding and in shock, was alive, her breath shallow, eyes wide with fear. She called 911 and told dispatchers she and her husband had been shot by two masked intruders who had burst into the garage. She claimed the attack came without warning. Investigators scoured the home, but no signs of forced entry emerged. No footprints, no broken windows, no witness accounts of suspicious figures. Nothing. At least nothing that pointed clearly to an outside robbery gone wrong. And yet a man lay dead, a woman wounded, a family forever changed. In the days that followed, the story shifted. The police began to treat the shooting not as a burglary, but as a crime rooted in betrayal. Suspicion turned inward. Brenda and her church associate, James Pavatt, became targets of scrutiny. The motive alleged by prosecutors would not be fear or greed of a thief, but greed for insurance money. A policy worth hundreds of thousands, newly signed by Rob, naming Brenda as the sole beneficiary. The once thought intruders now slunk into the shadows of doubt. Within a week, arrest warrants were issued. Brenda, Pavatt, and the children fled the state. They were later found trying to cross into Mexico. What began as a tragic home invasion story was now the center of a murder conspiracy investigation. And for the Andrews and the public, trust was replaced by suspicion, fear, and questions that would haunt courtrooms for years. Was the shooting random, or was it calculated? The crime scene offered facts: gunshot wounds, a dying man, a wounded woman, but left the truth buried under uncertainty. What drove the violence? Who pulled the trigger? In the quiet garage of their suburban home on November 20th, 2001, answers died with Rob Andrew. Imagine losing someone you love, only to be left to face accusations no one should bear. Was Brenda Andrew the victim or the villain? Subscribe, share, and tell us what you think, because the truth deserves to be heard. In the aftermath of Rob Andrew's tragic death, the investigation began to take a turn that no one could have predicted. At first, the case seemed like a tragic home invasion gone wrong. But as days passed, more questions arose, and suspicion began to creep in. Brenda's story about two masked intruders attacking them in their garage seemed less and less plausible. No forced entry, no sign of a struggle, just a dead husband and a wounded wife. As the investigation dug deeper, an unsettling detail emerged. Just days after the murder, Brenda and her lover, James Pavatt, vanished without a trace. They fled to Mexico, taking their two children with them. It was a bold move, a move that raised red flags for investigators. Innocent victims didn't usually flee the scene of a crime. Was Brenda running from a truth she knew, or was she just trying to escape the overwhelming grief and fear of being blamed? Pavatt, who had already come under suspicion, was eventually caught. He was brought back to the United States, where he eventually confessed to his involvement in Rob's death. But his confession was far from simple. Pavatt admitted to being part of the murder, but shockingly, he insisted that Brenda was not involved. He claimed that the crime was entirely his doing, and that Brenda had no role in it. This confession sent the investigation into a tailspin. On one hand, it seemed like the case might be solved. But then came the questions. Why would Pavatt confess to murder and yet protect Brenda? Was he lying to cover her involvement, or was he telling the truth? And if Brenda wasn't involved, why had she fled with Pavatt and the children? What was she hiding? The more authorities looked into it, the more they realized just how tangled the web of lies and deceit had become. Brenda's actions, her sudden disappearance, and Pavatt's conflicting story created a complex puzzle. Investigators were left with one burning question. Was Brenda a grieving wife, caught in a tragic situation, or was she complicit in her husband's death? As the case unfolded, one thing became clear. The truth was far from simple, and each new twist only deepened the mystery. The investigation into Rob Andrews' murder would not be easily solved. And Brenda's role in it was still unclear. The story of a random home invasion had become a twisted tale of betrayal, secrets, and unanswered questions. Would the real truth ever come to light? Only time would tell. It was 2004 when the courtroom doors closed on the case of Rob and Brenda Andrew. The jury would decide not just whether a man was dead, but whether a woman should pay with her life for a crime rooted in suspicion, whispers, and character judgment. At trial, prosecutors laid out their case. They accused Brenda Andrew of conspiring with her lover, James Pavatt, to kill her husband. The weapon, the timing, the motive. They claimed it all pointed to betrayal for money, the life insurance policy that named Brenda as beneficiary. Yet no strong physical evidence linked her directly to the murder. No fingerprints on the weapon, no eyewitness testimony placing her at the scene carrying out the act. Instead, the prosecution brought forward a different kind of evidence. Witnesses recounted details of Brenda's past relationships, her alleged affairs, the clothes she wore, even what she packed when travelling. Some of this evidence dated back decades, far removed from the night in question. In court, jurors were shown garments from Brenda's suitcase, underwear among them, with prosecutors asking whether a grieving widow packing such items could be trusted. During closing arguments, the narrative shifted. The question was no longer solely, did she kill her husband? It became, could she be trusted as a wife, a mother, a woman whose past made her worthy of sympathy or justice? The trial became less about murder and more about character. Despite the lack of direct evidence and the heavily circumstantial, character-driven case, the jury delivered a conviction. The charge: first-degree murder and conspiracy. The sentence: death. Brenda Andrew became one of the few women in Oklahoma, indeed the only woman at that time, to receive a capital sentence. In those moments, the courthouse did not just judge an act of violence. It weighed decades of personal history, relationships, and reputations. And on that scale, the jury found Brenda guilty. For many watching, the verdict raised more questions about justice than it answered. Was Brenda truly guilty, or was she judged for something far darker than the crime itself? Let us know what you think. Subscribe for more updates and share your thoughts in the comments, because the truth may be more complicated than we realize. Since 2004, Brenda Andrew has been incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma, serving a death sentence. For more than 2 decades, she has remained the sole woman on death row in the state. Her case, once regarded as one among many capital murder convictions, has grown into something far broader, a focal point in a national conversation about fairness, prejudice, and the standards of justice. Behind the prison walls, the daily reality for Brenda is one of isolation and uncertainty. As the only female death row inmate, her existence has stood out, a stark reminder that the legal consequences for one woman have saved their place in Oklahoma's history of capital punishment. Outside, her name stirs debate among human rights groups, legal scholars, and advocates for criminal justice reform, all questioning whether her trial was founded on fact or marred by stereotype. That question took on new weight in early 2025, when the Supreme Court determined that the original trial's introduction of evidence about her sex life, her relationships, and her personal history, much of it unrelated to the crime, may have violated her constitutional right to a fair trial. The court sent her case back for review, acknowledging that such prejudicial evidence can, under certain circumstances, render a trial fundamentally unfair. This decision did not guarantee her release or exoneration. Instead, it reopened a door of possibility, a chance for the system to re-examine what happened from the ground up. In June 2025, federal appellate judges began that re-examination. Until they reach a decision whether to uphold the conviction, order a new trial, or commute the sentence, Brenda Andrew remains behind the bars of Mabel Bassett. Her future is uncertain. Her fate hangs in the balance. For now, she remains the only woman on death row in Oklahoma, living a life no one asked for, yet one that has become central to a fight over justice, gender bias, and the integrity of a legal system. On January 21st, 2025, after more than 2 decades behind bars, a courtroom in Washington, D.C. offered a glimmer of possibility to a woman once condemned. The United States Supreme Court issued a per curiam ruling in favor of Brenda Andrew, sending her case back to federal appeals, not as a final vindication, but as a recognition that the trial which sentenced her to death may have been deeply flawed. The court accepted that during her 2004 trial for the murder of her husband, the prosecution had introduced sweeping evidence about her sexual history, her personal relationships, and even the clothing she wore, details entirely unrelated to the crime. According to court records, the prosecution elicited testimony about her past sexual partners going back decades, described her outfits and undergarments to jurors, even displayed a pair of her underwear before the jury. These tactics, the court concluded, much of which was later conceded irrelevant, could have tipped the scales unfairly. In a 7-2 decision, the justices found that such invasive, prejudicial information had the potential to poison the jury's impartiality. The court ordered the case be reconsidered by the Federal Appeals Court, a rare instance in which gender-based character evidence was deemed so destructive to fairness that the verdict itself warranted re-examination. For Brenda, this ruling did not immediately erase the verdict, nor release her from death row. What it did was something perhaps more powerful. It reopened hope. Her conviction, once regarded as final, was now subject to a fresh review, with the possibility that her sentence could be overturned or remanded for new proceedings. Outside the courtroom, the ruling sent shockwaves. Legal scholars, civil rights groups, and advocates for criminal justice reform hailed the decision as a landmark, a precedent acknowledging that prejudicial evidence targeting a defendant's gender, sexuality, or conformity to social norms can render a trial fundamentally unfair. The case of a woman once defined by a crime now challenged the very assumptions about guilt, evidence, and justice in American courtrooms. As the wheels of justice begin to turn once again, questions swirl. Will the lower courts overturn her conviction? Will she get a new trial? Or will a grateful system reaffirm her sentence despite the Supreme Court's warning? For now, the fate of Brenda Andrew remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. Her story is no longer simply about a crime. It is about prejudice, accountability, and what fairness truly means when a life hangs in the balance. In June 2025, a fresh turn in the long saga of Brenda Andrew unfolded. With the historic ruling from the highest court behind her, her case returned to the federal system, this time under the scrutiny of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. On June 19, 2025, appellate judges met to re-examine the entirety of her trial record, weighing whether what happened in 2004 had been fair and whether justice had truly been served. At stake are three potential paths. The court could uphold her conviction and death sentence, simply reaffirming what was decided 2 decades ago. Or it could order a new trial, allowing evidence and jury decisions to be retested under new scrutiny. The third option could be to modify her sentence, perhaps commuting the death penalty or resentencing entirely. Meanwhile, Brenda remains incarcerated at Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma, the only woman on death row in her state. The world outside watches. Legal scholars, advocacy groups, civil rights organizations are closely observing what comes next, aware that this case could set a new precedent in how courts treat evidence about personal history, sexuality, and character in capital trials. Many have framed this as more than one woman's fight. It is a test for fairness in the justice system. No decision has been announced yet. No date has been pinned for a final ruling. For now, the future of Brenda Andrew remains uncertain, hanging in the balance. As the appeals court reviews months of evidence, transcripts, and arguments, the question remains: will the courts change course, or will they uphold the life and death sentence that began so long ago? For viewers, the story is far from over. What happens next could reshape not only Brenda's fate, but the fate of the justice system itself. Stay with us, because the final chapter has not yet been written. Across the country, Brenda Andrew's case has grown into something far larger than a single trial. It has become a striking example of how deeply gender bias can seep into the justice system. Legal experts and advocacy groups point to her case as evidence of how easily a woman's personal life, her relationships, her sexuality, even the clothes she wore, can be twisted into proof of guilt, regardless of its relevance to the crime itself. Organizations dedicated to human rights and legal reform argue that Brenda wasn't judged solely on evidence, but on expectations placed on women. Instead of focusing on what happened the night Rob Andrew was killed, the trial became a referendum on who Brenda was as a woman. That shift has raised serious concerns about fairness in the courtroom and sparked ongoing debate about how character evidence can be misused. Her case now stands as a reminder that the justice system is not immune to prejudice. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths, that bias can influence verdicts, that personal history can overshadow facts, and that women are often held to harsher moral standards than men in the eyes of the law. As Brenda's appeals continue, her story is prompting a national conversation about reform and accountability. And for many watching, it's become clear that this fight is no longer just Brenda's. It's part of a larger push to ensure that no one is judged by anything other than the truth. If this perspective resonates with you, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more updates on the case. The conversation is just beginning. Brenda's fight for justice is far from over. Will she finally get the fair trial she deserves? Share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more updates on this ongoing legal battle. This is Fatal Verdict. Thank you for watching, and remember, these are not just stories, these are real people, real victims and real consequences. Until next time, keep living your best life.